The plane sat at the gate, its engines humming softly as passengers filed aboard. It was a typical weekday morning, and the flight from New York to Los Angeles promised to be uneventful. People shuffled down the narrow aisle, stowing their carry-ons in overhead bins and finding their assigned seats. Among them was Maya Johnson, a young woman with a quiet confidence that seemed to set her apart. She wore a sleek blazer over a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her eyes scanned the cabin briefly before she made her way toward the front of the plane. Maya had earned this seat. First class wasn't something she splurged on often, but today was special. After months of grueling work, she had finally closed a major deal for her company, EtherTech. The software solutions she developed were revolutionizing the aviation industry, making flights safer and more efficient. This trip was both a celebration and a chance to meet potential investors who could help take her business to the next level. As she reached row 3, she slid her ticket out of her bag and double-checked the seat number. Yes, it was correct. She smiled faintly and settled into the plush leather chair by the window. Around her, other first-class passengers began to get comfortable. There was an older man in a suit typing furiously on his laptop, a couple sharing earbuds as they watched, something on a tablet, and a mother gently rocking her sleeping toddler. The atmosphere felt calm, almost serene. Maya tucked her bag under the seat in front of her and adjusted her seatbelt. She glanced out the window, watching ground crew scurry about below. Everything seemed normal, until the cockpit door opened. Richard. Hunt stepped out, his uniform crisp and his posture stiff. He was a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that rarely softened. Richard prided himself on his authority, believing firmly that respect came with the title of captain. Today, however, he felt unusually irritated. Delays earlier in the week had disrupted his schedule, and he'd barely slept the night before. His mood worsened when he spotted Maya sitting in one of the premium seats. Something about her presence didn't sit right with him. He approached her slowly, his boots clicking against the floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice clipped. Maya looked up, surprised. "Yes," she replied politely. Richard gestured vaguely toward her seat. "Is this where you're supposed to be?" he asked, skepticism dripping from every word. Maya blinked, unsure why he was questioning her. She reached for her ticket again and held it up. "Yes, this is my seat," she said calmly. "Row 3, window side." For a moment, Richard hesitated. The ticket confirmed her claim, but his expression didn't change. Instead, he leaned closer, his tone growing sharper. "Are you sure? These seats are reserved for first-class passengers." Maya's jaw tightened slightly, though she kept her voice steady. "I am a first-class passenger," she said. "Here's my boarding pass, you can see for yourself." But Richard wasn't interested in listening anymore. In his mind, someone like her, a black woman traveling alone, didn't belong here. He waved dismissively at the ticket, refusing to look at it. "This must be some kind of mistake," he muttered loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Some turned their heads, curious about the exchange. Others pretended not to notice, keeping their focus on their books or phones. Maya felt heat rising in her chest, but she reminded herself to stay composed. Arguing wouldn't solve anything. "I assure you there's no mistake," she said firmly. "I purchased this ticket just like everyone else." Richard crossed his arms, his irritation turning into outright hostility. "Look," he snapped. "If you don't have proof, I suggest you move to economy. We don't need any troublemakers holding up the flight." His words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Trouble? Maya thought bitterly. All I did was sit in my assigned seat. By now, several passengers were openly watching the confrontation. One elderly woman in the adjacent row frowned disapprovingly at Richard. A businessman 2 rows back shifted uncomfortably, while a teenage girl recorded the scene on her phone. Maya took a deep breath, determined not to let this escalate further. She pulled out her phone and opened her email, showing Richard the confirmation from the airline. "See for yourself," she said, holding the screen toward him. But Richard refused to look. Instead, he grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her upward. Enough, he barked. You're causing a disturbance. Move, now, or I'll have security remove you. Before Maya could respond, he raised his hand and struck her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, shocking everyone into silence. For a split second, no one moved. Then, chaos erupted. Passengers gasped and shouted, some jumping to their feet. "What are you doing?" cried the elderly woman, her voice trembling with anger. The businessman lunged forward, grabbing Richard's shoulder. "Hey, that's completely unacceptable," he yelled. Even the flight attendants rushed over, their faces pale with alarm. "Captain Hunt, stop," one of them pleaded. But Richard stood frozen, his hand still raised as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Maya staggered back slightly, her cheek burning where he'd hit her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Slowly, she straightened, up, meeting Richard's gaze with a steely determination. "You've made a huge mistake," she said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that silenced the room once again. Richard opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. As the commotion continued, one of the flight attendants ushered Maya to a quieter area near the galley. Another attendant stayed behind to calm the angry passengers, promising that the situation would be addressed immediately. Meanwhile, a few people began posting videos and photos online, tagging airlines and news outlets. Within minutes, hashtags like #Justice for Maya and #Skylink scandal started trending on social media. The incident was far from over. It was only the beginning. Though shaken, Maya knew she couldn't let this go unanswered. Sitting in the galley, she clenched her fists and thought about all the hard work that had brought her here. She hadn't risen to the top of her field by backing down, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. Whatever happened next. One thing was clear. Richard Hunt had underestimated her, and soon the entire airline would pay the price. The plane finally landed at Los Angeles International Airport, but the tension inside the cabin remained thick. Passengers disembarked slowly, many still whispering about what had happened. Some approached Maya as she waited near the gate, offering words of support or asking if she was okay. "That was completely wrong," said a middle-aged man with glasses. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Maya nodded politely, though her mind was elsewhere. She appreciated their concern, but she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than one incident on one flight. As the crowd thinned out, Maya's phone buzzed repeatedly in her hand. Notifications flooded her screen, texts from friends, missed calls from colleagues, and dozens of alerts from social media apps. The video of Richard Hunt striking her had gone viral within hours. People across the country were outraged, and hashtags like #Justice for Maya and #Skylink scandal dominated Twitter and Instagram. Journalists were already reaching out for interviews, while activists praised her composure under such blatant discrimination. But Maya didn't feel triumphant. If anything, she felt a deep sense of resolve. She stepped into a quiet corner of the terminal and opened her email. There, she typed a quick message to Daniel Carter, her closest colleague at EtherTech. "Can you meet me at HQ? Urgent." Daniel was the kind of person who thrived on logic and problem-solving. He wasn't flashy or loud, but his brilliance shone through in everything he did. Maya trusted him completely, and right now she needed someone level-headed by her side. Within an hour, they were sitting in her office, a sleek, modern space filled with whiteboards covered in equations and diagrams. Maya leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled together as she thought carefully about how to proceed. "They think I'm just another passenger," she said finally, breaking the silence. "But they have no idea who I really am, or what I can do." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously thinking about going after Skylink, are you?" he asked cautiously. Maya smiled faintly. "Not just Skylink," she replied. "The whole system. They want to treat me like I don't belong. Fine, let's show them exactly what happens when they mess with someone who does." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maya, I get it, you're angry, we all are. But taking on an entire airline is complicated. These companies have lawyers, lobbyists, PR teams. They'll crush us if we're not careful." Maya shook her head. No, they won't, she said firmly. Because we're not fighting fair. We're fighting smart. Over the next few hours, Maya laid out her plan. EtherTech provided critical software to airlines around the world, including Skylink. Their systems handled everything from flight scheduling to fuel efficiency calculations to customer service chatbots. Without EtherTech's technology, most airlines would struggle to operate efficiently, or at all. And Maya had access to every line of code. We shut them down, she explained. Not permanently, obviously, just long enough to make a point. Ground every single Skylink flight until they agree to real change. Daniel frowned. And what happens when they figure out it's us? You could lose your company, your reputation, everything. Maya met his gaze steadily. Then I guess I'll have to make sure they never find out. By midnight, the two of them were hunched over laptops in EtherTech's server room, surrounded by blinking lights and humming machines. Maya worked quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she wrote lines of code designed to disrupt Skylink's operations without causing harm to passengers. She programmed glitches into their booking system, delays into their departure, schedules and errors into their navigation software. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to bring the airline to its knees. As dawn broke, the first signs of trouble began to appear. At airports across the country, Skylink flights were delayed or canceled without explanation. Pilots reported strange malfunctions in their cockpits while ground staff scrambled to fix issues with baggage handling and boarding procedures. Passengers grew increasingly frustrated, flooding social media with complaints. What is going on with Skylink today? One traveler tweeted. Every flight seems to be falling apart. Back at EtherTech, Maya watched the chaos unfold on her monitor. News outlets picked up the story, speculating about everything from cyber attacks to mechanical failures. Skylink executives held emergency meetings, trying to identify the source of the problem. But no matter what they tried, the issues kept multiplying. It was as if the airline itself had been cursed. Meanwhile, Maya prepared for the next phase of her plan. She drafted a statement to release to the press, detailing the systemic racism and discrimination she had uncovered within Skylink's corporate culture. Using anonymous tips and leaked documents, she painted a damning picture of an organization that valued profit over people and prejudice over progress. Her goal wasn't just to expose Skylink, it was to hold them accountable. When the statement hit the internet later that day, it sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. Employees came forward with stories of harassment and bias, while customers shared their own experiences of being mistreated by Skylink staff. Protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters, holding signs that read, "End racism in the skies," and "Justice for Maya Johnson." Even lawmakers weighed in, calling for investigations and reforms. Through it all, Maya remained calm and focused. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't back down. What started as a personal attack had become a fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. And as the world watched, waiting to see what would happen next, Maya proved that sometimes the smallest spark could ignite the biggest fire. The next morning, chaos erupted at airports across the country. Skylink's operations were in complete disarray. Flights scheduled to depart were delayed indefinitely, passengers stranded in terminals with no answers. Gates that should have been bustling with activity were eerily quiet, save for the frustrated murmurs of travelers and the occasional announcement apologizing for unexpected technical difficulties. Even seasoned pilots and ground staff couldn't figure out what was happening. Navigation systems glitched, fuel calculations failed, and customer service lines were overwhelmed with calls. At Los Angeles International Airport, a mother holding her toddler's hand tried to board a flight to Chicago, only to be told it had been canceled without explanation. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at a frazzled gate agent. "I've already missed my sister's wedding because of this mess." Nearby, a businessman pacing back and forth muttered angrily into his phone, "They don't even know when the next available flight is. It's like they've lost control of everything." News outlets scrambled to cover the unfolding crisis. Reporters stood outside terminals, microphones in hand, interviewing disgruntled passengers and bewildered employees. One anchor on a major network described the situation as unprecedented, while another speculated about possible cyber attacks or equipment failures. Social media buzzed with theories and complaints. Skylink is falling apart. One user tweeted, "Is this revenge for what happened to Maya Johnson?" Others chimed in, sharing memes and jokes mocking the airline's incompetence. Behind closed doors, Skylink executives gathered in an emergency meeting room. The mood was tense, bordering on panic. Richard Hunt sat at the far end of the table, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't slept since the incident, haunted by images of Maya's calm expression as he struck her. Now, watching the company he'd worked for crumble around him, he felt a crushing weight of guilt and fear. What had he unleashed? The CEO of Skylink, a man named Gary Miller, slammed his fist on the table. "We need answers, people," he barked. "How could this happen? How does an entire fleet go down overnight?" Engineers and IT specialists shook their heads helplessly. "It's not just one system," explained one tech lead. "Everything, navigation, scheduling, maintenance logs, it's all failing. Simultaneously, it's like someone's deliberately sabotaging us." Gary's eyes narrowed. "Sabotage?" he repeated. "Are you saying this is intentional?" The tech lead hesitated before nodding. "That's exactly what it looks like, and whoever's behind it knows our systems inside and out." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Someone with intimate knowledge of Skylink's infrastructure was targeting them, and doing it masterfully. Meanwhile, Maya watched the fallout from her office. Her laptop displayed live updates from news sites, social media feeds, and internal reports leaked by whistleblowers within Skylink. She scrolled through messages from supporters praising her actions, alongside angry rants from those who accused her of going too far. Some argued that grounding flights put innocent people at risk, while others insisted she was justified given the circumstances. Maya ignored both extremes, focusing instead on the bigger picture. She opened a video call with Daniel Carter, who looked exhausted, but determined. "Phase 1 is working better than I expected," he admitted, "but they're starting to suspect foul play. If they trace this back to EtherTech..." His voice trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. Maya nodded thoughtfully. "They won't," she replied. "Not if we stay careful. Besides, they'll be too busy dealing with public pressure to focus on us right now." Daniel frowned. "Public pressure can cut both ways, Maya. People are already calling you a hero, but some are questioning whether your methods are ethical. You're walking a fine line here." Maya leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Ethics didn't stop them from treating me like garbage," she said quietly. "If they want to talk about ethics, let them start by fixing their own house." Later that day, Skylink issued a public apology. In a hastily arranged press conference, Gary Miller stood before cameras, sweat glistening on his forehead. "First and foremost, we want to express our deepest regret for the recent events involving Ms. Maya Johnson," he began, reading from a prepared statement. "What happened on that flight was unacceptable, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure such behavior never occurs again." Maya listened to the apology from her desk, her lips curling into a bitter smile. Apologies were easy, especially when they came under duress, but words meant nothing without action. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized days earlier. When the person on the other end answered, Maya spoke clearly and confidently. "It's time," she said simply. "Release the documents." Within minutes, the internet exploded with new revelations. Leaked emails and internal memos exposed a culture of discrimination deeply embedded in Skylink's corporate structure. One email chain revealed executives joking about keeping certain types of people out of first class. Another memo outlined plans to reduce diversity hiring initiatives, citing cost concerns. Employees came forward with stories of being passed over for promotions or facing harassment from superiors. Each revelation added fuel to the firestorm consuming the airline. Protests grew larger and more vocal. Activists organized rallies outside Skylink offices in major cities, chanting slogans and demanding accountability. Politicians joined the chorus, calling for investigations into the airline's practices. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight and protecting marginalized travelers. Even competitors began distancing themselves from Skylink, eager to avoid association with the scandal. For Richard Hunt, the consequences were swift and severe. Suspended pending investigation, he became a pariah overnight. Former colleagues avoided him, and strangers recognized him in public, pointing fingers or hurling insults. He spent hours staring at his reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back. Guilt gnawed at him constantly, a reminder of the damage he had caused, not just to Maya but to countless others whose lives had been disrupted by his actions. As the days passed, Maya found herself thrust further into the spotlight. Journalists begged for interviews, activists sought her endorsement, and ordinary people reached out to thank her for standing up against injustice. Yet despite the growing attention, she remained focused on her mission. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about creating lasting change. Every decision she made, every move she orchestrated, served that purpose. One evening, as she reviewed the latest batch of leaked documents, Daniel walked into her office carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat down across from her. "You know," he said after a long pause, "you're changing the game here. Not just for Skylink, but for the whole industry." Maya took a sip of her coffee, her gaze fixed on the screen in front of her. "Good," she replied softly, "because the game needed to change." And change it did. With each passing day, the cracks in Skylink's foundation widened, exposing truths that had long been hidden. The airline wasn't just fighting a PR battle. It was fighting for its survival. Meanwhile, Maya stood at the center of it all, a quiet force driving the storm. For the first time in years, the powerful were being forced to listen to the powerless. And the world was watching. The pressure on Skylink continued to mount. What had started as a single incident on a flight from New York to Los Angeles had spiraled into a full-blown crisis that dominated headlines worldwide. Passengers were still stranded, flights remained grounded, and the airline's reputation was in tatters. Behind the scenes, executives scrambled to find solutions, but every attempt seemed to fail. The system's glitches persisted, defying even their most experienced engineers. It was as if the airline itself had been cursed, a punishment for years of unchecked discrimination and arrogance. Maya sat in her office, scrolling through news articles and social media posts about the chaos unfolding across the country. She felt no joy in seeing Skylink crumble, but she couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching justice take shape. For so long, people like her had been dismissed, ignored, or mistreated simply because of who they were. Now, the tables had turned. The same systems that had once excluded her were now working against those who thought they were untouchable. Her phone buzzed with another notification. This time, it was an invitation to speak at a national conference on workplace equity and diversity. Activists praised her courage, calling her a symbol of resilience and change. But Maya wasn't interested in becoming a poster child for anyone. She knew the fight wasn't over yet. Grounding flights and leaking documents were just the beginning. Real change required more than exposing wrongdoing. It demanded accountability. Skylink tried desperately to salvage its image. Gary Miller, the CEO, appeared on multiple talk shows, pleading with the public to give his company a second chance. "We are committed to reform," he said during one interview, his voice strained with desperation. "This is a wake-up call for us, and we're taking immediate steps to address these issues." He announced plans to hire independent auditors, to review the company's practices, create new diversity initiatives, and offer compensation to affected passengers. But his words rang hollow to many. Promises were easy to make when there was no other choice. Meanwhile, Richard Hunt faced the full weight of his actions. Criminal charges were filed against him for assault, and his name became synonymous with prejudice and abuse of power. Former colleagues distanced themselves from him, while strangers online mocked him mercilessly. He tried to defend himself, in interviews claiming he'd simply been upset and hadn't meant to cause harm. But the damage was done. His career was over, and his life would never be the same. In response to the growing outrage, lawmakers began drafting legislation aimed at holding airlines accountable for discriminatory practices. Politicians referenced Maya's case repeatedly, using it as proof that systemic racism still existed and needed to be eradicated. One senator introduced a bill requiring mandatory bias training for all airline staff, along with stricter penalties for companies found guilty of discrimination. Another proposed creating an oversight board to monitor corporate behavior and protect marginalized travelers. These proposals gained widespread support, signaling a shift in how society viewed accountability in the aviation industry. For Maya, the turning point came when she decided to hold her own press conference. Flanked by Daniel Carter and a team of legal advisors, she stood before a crowd of reporters and cameras, her presence commanding attention. Gone was the calm, reserved woman who had quietly endured Richard Hunt's aggression on the plane. In her place stood someone stronger, bolder, someone ready to demand justice not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. "I didn't ask for this fight," she began, her voice steady but powerful. "It was forced upon me the moment someone decided I didn't belong in my rightful seat. But now that I'm here, I won't back down. What happened to me isn't unique. It's part of a pattern of exclusion, of prejudice, of treating people as less than human because of the color of their skin." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Skylink isn't the only airline guilty of this. Across the industry, there are countless stories of discrimination, harassment, and neglect. We've tolerated it for too long because we believed we had no power to stop it. But we do have power. And today, I'm using mine to say enough is enough." Maya outlined her demands clearly: a complete overhaul of Skylink's leadership, transparent investigations into discriminatory practices, and binding commitments to equity and inclusion. She also called for reforms across the entire aviation industry, urging competitors to adopt stricter standards and greater accountability. Her message resonated deeply, earning applause from the audience and sparking conversations around the world. The impact of her speech was immediate. Protesters renewed their calls for justice, flooding social media with hashtags like #Accountability in aviation and Browsk End Racism in the Skies. Employees of other airlines began speaking out about similar experiences within their own companies, adding fuel to the movement. Competitors scrambled to distance themselves from Skylink, releasing statements reaffirming their commitment to equality and respect. Some even reached out to Maya directly, seeking her advice on implementing meaningful changes. Behind closed doors, Skylink executives debated their next move. Their attempts to fix the technical issues had failed miserably, leaving them vulnerable to further scrutiny. Desperate for a solution, they sent a private envoy to meet with Maya. The man, a high-ranking lawyer named Charles Bennett, arrived at EtherTech headquarters carrying a briefcase filled with documents. He greeted Maya with a nervous smile, extending his hand cautiously. "Ms. Johnson," he said, "thank you for agreeing to see me." Maya gestured for him to sit, her expression unreadable. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. Charles cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "On behalf of Skylink, I'd like to offer you a settlement," he said. "A substantial financial compensation, along with a formal apology and guarantees of policy changes. All we ask is that you end your campaign against us." Maya stared at him for a long moment, her eyes sharp and unyielding. Then she shook her head slowly. "Money isn't going to fix this," she replied. "You can throw all the cash in the world at me, but it won't erase decades of discrimination. If you truly want to make things right, start by firing everyone responsible for this mess, including your CEO. Then rebuild your company from the ground up with real diversity and transparency at its core." Charles looked stunned. "That's not realistic," he stammered. "You're asking us to dismantle our entire organization." Maya leaned forward, her voice cutting through the air like steel. "Maybe it should have been dismantled a long time ago," she said. "If you're serious about change, you'll do what needs to be done, Otherwise, don't waste my time." With that, the meeting ended. Charles left empty-handed, realizing too late that Maya wasn't someone who could be bought off or intimidated. Back at Skylink headquarters, panic spread among the executives. They had underestimated her resolve, and now they were paying the price. As the days turned into weeks, the airline continued to struggle. Financial losses mounted, lawsuits piled up, and public trust plummeted. Employees resigned in droves, unwilling to associate themselves with a sinking ship. Competitors seized the opportunity to poach customers, offering discounts and promotions to lure them away. By the time Skylink finally managed to restore its systems, the damage was irreversible. Through it all, Maya remained focused on her mission. She worked tirelessly to ensure that her efforts led to lasting change, collaborating with activists, lawmakers, and industry leaders to push for reforms. Her determination inspired others to join the fight, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the aviation sector. People began to realize that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about building a better future for everyone. And though the road ahead would be long and challenging, Maya knew she had already achieved something remarkable. She had shown the world that even the smallest act of resistance could spark a revolution. The skies might still be turbulent, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope on the horizon. The dust began to settle, but the scars left behind by the Skylink scandal ran deep. The airline's once glorious reputation was in ruins, its name synonymous with discrimination and failure. Richard Hunt, the man whose actions had sparked the entire crisis, faced criminal charges that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His trial became a media spectacle, with Maya Johnson called to testify against him. When she took the stand, her calm demeanor and unwavering resolve silenced the courtroom. She spoke not just about what had happened on the plane, but about the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to thrive unchecked. Her words carried weight, leaving jurors visibly moved. Richard was found guilty of assault and sentenced to jail time. For many, it felt like justice had been served. Yet Maya knew this was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Punishing one man wasn't enough. It was the system itself that needed to change. And so, even after the verdict was announced, she refused to step back. Instead, she doubled down on her efforts, working tirelessly to ensure that the lessons learned from this ordeal wouldn't be forgotten. Skylink, meanwhile, was forced to undergo a complete transformation. Under mounting pressure from lawmakers, activists, and the public, the company fired its CEO, Gary Miller, along with several top executives implicated in fostering a toxic corporate culture. A new leadership team was brought in, tasked with rebuilding the airline from scratch. They hired independent auditors to review every aspect of their operations, from hiring practices to customer service protocols. Transparency became their mantra, and accountability their guiding principle. Maya played an active role in shaping these changes. She met regularly with Skylink's new leaders, offering advice on how to create a more inclusive workplace. "This isn't about checking boxes," she told them during one meeting. "It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued, where people don't have to fight just to be treated fairly." Her input proved invaluable, helping the airline implement policies that set a new standard for the industry. Other airlines took notice. Fearing similar backlash, they began conducting internal reviews of their own practices. Some reached out to Maya directly, asking for guidance on addressing blind spots they hadn't realized existed. Slowly but surely, the aviation industry started to shift. Bias training programs were introduced, diversity initiatives expanded, and passenger feedback systems improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and Maya knew progress was worth celebrating. Her role in all of this didn't go unnoticed. People around the world hailed her as a hero, though she never saw herself that way. To her, she had simply done what anyone should do when faced with injustice: speak up and take action. Still, she couldn't deny the impact her efforts had made. Activists credited her with sparking a movement that extended far beyond the skies. Schools invited her to give talks, businesses sought her expertise, and community organizations honored her with awards. Through it all, Maya remained humble, deflecting praise onto those who had supported her along the way. One evening, as she sat in her office overlooking the city lights, Daniel Carter walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and leaned against the desk, watching her with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed the world, you know," he said quietly. Maya smiled faintly, shaking her head. "Not the whole world," she replied. "Just a small part of it. But maybe that's enough for now." Daniel chuckled softly. "For now? You're already planning your next move, aren't you?" Maya didn't answer right away. She stared out the window, thinking about everything that had happened. The chaos, the resistance, the victories. There was still so much work to be done, not just in aviation, but in countless other industries plagued by inequality. She had started something powerful, and she wasn't ready to stop anytime soon. "I can't sit back and watch while people suffer," she said finally. "If I see another problem, I'll tackle it. That's just who I am." Daniel nodded, unsurprised. "Well, whatever you decide to do next, count me in. We make a pretty good team." Maya laughed, a rare, genuine laugh that lit up the room. "Yeah, we do," she agreed. "But let's take a break first. Even heroes need rest sometimes." In the months that followed, Maya focused on expanding EtherTech's mission. She poured resources into developing new technologies aimed at promoting equity and accessibility in travel. One project involved creating AI-powered tools to identify and eliminate bias in customer service interactions. Another focused on improving navigation systems for remote communities, often overlooked by mainstream airlines. Her innovations continued to revolutionize the industry, earning her widespread acclaim, but more importantly, they helped level the playing field for millions of travelers. Though fame wasn't something she craved, Maya embraced the platform it gave her. She used her voice to advocate for marginalized communities, speaking out on issues ranging from workplace discrimination to environmental sustainability. Her advocacy inspired others to join the fight, creating a ripple effect that spread across industries and borders. People began to see her not just as a tech pioneer or a crusader for justice, but as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance to build something better. As time passed, the memory of the Skylink scandal faded from the headlines, replaced by newer stories and challenges. But its legacy endured. Laws were rewritten, policies reformed, and attitudes reshaped. Passengers boarded planes knowing they had rights, and that someone out there was willing to fight for them if those rights were violated. For Maya, that knowledge was worth more than any award or recognition. On a quiet afternoon years later, Maya found herself sitting in an airport terminal, waiting to board a flight to New York. As she watched families reunite and business travelers rush to their gates, she felt a sense of peace. The world wasn't perfect, it likely never would be, but it was moving in the right direction, and she had played a part in steering it there. A young girl approached her hesitantly, clutching a notebook and pen. "Excuse me," the girl said, shyly. "Are you Maya Johnson?" Maya smiled warmly, nodding. "I am," she replied. The girl beamed. "Can I have your autograph? My mom says you're a real-life superhero." Maya chuckled, signing the notebook with a flourish. "Tell your mom I'm just a regular person trying to make things better," she said. "And maybe you can help too someday." The girl nodded eagerly before running back to her mother, holding the signed notebook like a treasure. Watching her go, Maya felt a surge of gratitude for the journey she'd been on, for the people who had stood by her side, and for the future that lay ahead. Whatever challenges came next, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The skies might still hold storms, but together, they could weather anything.